California. Here we come. Okay, I'm James Polis. This is 0 Hour. With apologies to Phantom Planet and you for listening to those first few notes, we've got a great American and a great Californian with us today. We're going to talk about what has become of what I think was once at some point in my life the greatest state in the Union. Chris Bray is a former infantry sergeant in the U.S. Army, a former local newspaper reporter, and a former academic historian. He's a BlazeMedia columnist, and he writes, "Tell me how this ends," on Substack. That's like a good sort of California fatalism. Welcome, Chris.
Because we don't know how it ends, especially if we live in California.
So you can't tell me how this ends.
I have no idea.
Is the state going to slide into the sea?
Boy, we can sure hope so. California has broken with reality in such a dramatic way that I don't think anyone in California knows where it's going to go. We're kind of having a conversation about nothing at all.
Yeah.
I watched my favorite moment of the debate between the California way and the Florida way was I just forgot the name of our governor for a moment, which tells you psychologically where I am.
Governor Patrick Bateman.
Governor Patrick Bateman, shouting, "We dominate! We dominate!" And the things he named about we dominate, we have great universities, things like that. All of the things he was talking about were built, the great universities were built like in the 1880s.
Yeah, we seized control of a system that we can't keep going.
We have Berkeley. I'm doing such a good job.
Oh, very good job.
And all these things that were built by previous generations, I've used the comparison of Grey Gardens, the movie Grey Gardens, with the Bouviers who marry into a wealthy family and acquire a mansion that they can't take care of, and they gradually run it down and down and down, but won't move out of it, and keep living in it with the raccoons that wander through. That's California.
Yeah.
We're Grey Gardens.
Do you have a favorite California movie?
What happens to nosy guys? They lose their noses.
Kitty Cat?
Chinatown.
Yeah.
It can only be Chinatown.
Forget it, Jack.
Chinatown. Others.
Yeah. Chinatown is good. Had the script, the original screenplay, classic film about LA's origins. A dark film, as many of those California movies are. One of my favorites, Inherent Vice. I don't know if you've seen Inherent Vice. Thomas Pynchon adapted. It's actually quite good and somewhat humorous, but very dark. One of the funny dark things in that film, there's a pretend militia organization called Vigilant California, and it's full of like informers and all kinds of plots. I mean, Pynchon, he spent a lot of time in California, Southern California. He was like working with Rocketdyne and sort of living down there in El Segundo, and I think he saw some things and tried to let people know what was going on in his books. He did a couple of SoCal books, but Vigilant California. It was such a powerful force, that kind of populist conservatism, even in California. A lot of people don't remember. It was really there. You had like Bob Dornan in Orange County, the defense industry, San Diego, you got the Navy down there, Pete Wilson, Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon. It was a powerhouse.
Where did
it go?
For a long time was a tremendously conservative newspaper.
Yeah, that's right. It wasn't just the Register.
I used to really kind of admire Jerry Brown, and the thing I liked about Jerry Brown the first time he was the governor, and kind of the second time he was the governor, because he kept doing it. Like when Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor, to draw a comparison, when Arnold Schwarzenegger would come home from Sacramento to Brentwood where he lived, I lived in LA, so I would watch him coming home, and police motorcycles would start flying by, and then CHP cars with sirens and lights, and dozens of vehicles like a head of state coming by. And Jerry Brown, when he was governor, if he had to go somewhere, if he had to go to LA for meetings for the day, you'd be standing in line at the Southwest ticket where you line up by the numbers, and the guy in line behind you would be the governor of the state, clutching his boarding pass. He needed to go somewhere, he jumped in the car and drove over. I thought that was populist California. That was California, like if you're the governor of the state, you need to do so. jump on the plane.
Very un-Moonbeam of him.
Very un-Moon, but also kind of on brand and Moonbeamish in his own way, because he had a very modest sense of himself.
Yes.
And he lost it. What happened to California? I was just watching him talk about the train that was supposed to cost $30 billion.
Yes.
The speed train that was supposed to connect Los Angeles and San Francisco, and it was going to cost $30 billion. We were going to build it in a few years. We approved it in 2008.
Is it a failure if it doesn't even exist?
It's a very Thomas Pynchon question.
Yeah.
And he was talking about, like a week ago, talking about the train and talking about the fact that now it's going to cost something like $130 billion. Maybe we can finish a little bit of it in a few years. We think maybe it's going to go from Bakersfield to Merced, which is really the dream in California, to go from Bakersfield to Merced.
From sea to shining sea.
But Jerry Brown said, well, you know, some Lilliputian minds don't understand great thoughts about the future and the way we're building the future in California. So this guy who built a governorship around being modest, thinking carefully, not being crazy, suddenly is ranting about if you're not seeing that fixed rails and trains, the technology of the 19th century, is the future, you have a Lilliputian mind. We have this constant, dramatic, performative, playing for the audience, performance politics that have no connection at all to anything that's really happening. If you have a Lilliputian mind, if you don't look at the piles, the concrete pilings we've built between Bakersfield and Merced for $30 billion that don't have any rail between them, there's no train, there's no rail, nothing goes anywhere, but you have a Lilliputian mind if you don't celebrate it. That's what happened. We got lost in the idea, and we forgot all of the stuff that's real. We forgot all of the literal, physical, living reality.
Yeah, I mean, Jerry did a good job of keeping Gavin Newsom on ice for 8 years. Newsom notoriously wanted to be the very most important and active lieutenant governor that had ever lived on planet Earth, and Jerry put him in his place. I mean, as far as the Lilliputian thing, you can go all the way back, I think, to Emerson. That consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds. But there is something special about California. I mean, this was the dream factory. This is the idea factory. If you can dream it, you can do it. Follow your passions. Whether it's Hollywood or whether it's Silicon Valley, it really did run on, California got high on its own supply. And it seems to not be done yet.
California got high in the fact that it worked. California got high in the fact that my parents, my mother grew up in Queens, was born in Flushing Meadows, grew up in Queens. My father grew up in southern Indiana. My parents met because both of their families left, rural southern Indiana and the middle of New York City and came to Orange County in the 1950s looking for opportunity, looking for comfort, looking for a good middle-class, blue-collar life, working in the defense industry, working in the world of B-1 Bob Dornan. And California was a middle-class magnet. California was a place where you came and lived a beautiful, brilliant, middle existence. And we made stuff. And my parents were the first in their families, both sides, to go to college because they went to the brilliant Cal State system that provided exceptional teaching with no student loans, it was so affordable that they could just work part-time jobs on the side while they went to college and had a young child.
Yeah.
And pay for it and finish their degrees in 4 years without financial aid and without struggling. And they taught well. It was a good system. And after all of that, after inheriting all of that, after getting all of that stuff that other people made, we Gavin Newsomed ourselves. We said, oh, we dominate. Look at this, third base. And we stopped building. And we stopped thinking in practical terms. I was talking earlier today about the fact that about 2,000 people a year die homeless in Los Angeles County. They die in tents on the sidewalks, but we no longer call them homeless people.
They died unhoused.
We call them our unhoused neighbors. Yeah. That's what we do. We lose more and more of the stuff, the real things that you can put your hands on, and we get more and more of the meaningless, pointless, insane performative language. Or to say that all more simply, we get Gavin Newsom.
You're still in California, you're in SoCal. You haven't given up on the state entirely then?
I would not make that claim. I mean, the fascinating thing, I think something like 45% of the population of the state now says in polls, I would leave if I could.
Yeah.
We're all, I was born in California. My life is in California. I've left California a bunch of times. And I always come back because I have people in California. I have family in California. I have things in California that are my life. Mm-hmm. So I struggle with this. This is my life. I live here. Oh God, I hate it. It's a failed state. It doesn't work. The freeway fire we just had.
On the 10.
Underneath the 10.
That's right.
I was watching footage of the freeway fire and thinking about how brilliantly it had been shot, because whoever was shooting it managed to get down into the encampments and was showing, like, firefighters, huge fire, freeway, homeless encampments, firefighters spraying water over the homeless encampments into the fire.
Yeah.
Massive homeless encampments under the freeways with all of this garbage, this highly flammable garbage, pallets stacked to the ceiling, stored under the freeways. We dominate. We have the greatest universities. Our reality is filth and death and decay and more stuff that we don't even try to take care of. It's not that we're failing to take care of it. We don't try to take care of it. Freeways poorly paved. The streets in my little suburban city haven't been repaved for years and years and years. I have to tell you about the Teslas.
They catch on fire too.
My city government, I live in a 3.4 square mile little suburban town. And my city government, which hasn't paved the streets for years and years and years, has a climate action plan. They're fixing the climate of the planet. And the most important thing they've done to do that is that our police department, we have a 5-officer patrol shift. We have about 30 police officers. They've been patrolling in patrol cars that destroy the climate because they have internal combustion engines.
Yes, they need bicycles. Stat.
So we've stabilized the climate. We've leased 20 Teslas for the police department so they can patrol in electric cars. Mm-hmm. We took delivery in December of 2022. I watched them parking all the Teslas, lining them up behind the police station. And then when they got them, they said, oh, we should build some charging stations.
Of course.
And they haven't used any of them yet. They don't actually patrol in any of the Teslas. You can go look at them parked behind City Hall. It's been a year. None of them are ready to use as police cars, but we passed the symbol of acquiring Teslas.
The virtue is being signaled very loudly.
The virtue is parked behind City Hall. We took this vote for the climate to not change anymore, and the cars were delivered. We're not using them. We're not able to use them. We're not prepared to use them.
Change.
We haven't built the charging stations. You know, and there's been discussion about, like, well, maybe the officers can take the cars out and then go drive around in the community and look for a charging station out around town somewhere.
They will probably be painted rainbow colors and driven down Main Street on the 4th of July.
I lived in West Hollywood when we painted rainbow crosswalks for like $100,000.
Yes, path-breaking.
And had a debate about, like, does this matter? Does this mean something? And I took the minority position. I took the losing side of the debate and said, it's a crosswalk. There are other things we could do with that $100,000, but in California, what do? We perform symbols. And I think we're at the point where the freeways are melting and falling down because we've performed our symbols so much that we've lost reality in ways that can't be ignored anymore.
You know, you really have to have a very large trash fire in order to melt the columns holding up a freeway.
Go watch those videos.
Yeah.
It was an astonishing fire, and it happened really quickly. And then, Like 3 days later, the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, and Kamala Harris flew in, and Gavin Newsom, they stood on the freeway, and they celebrated what a brilliant job they were doing rebuilding it. And they got wooden trusses. One of my readers told me that those wooden trusses are called false work. And I said, oh, thank you so much.
So good.
They
There's
propped
a
the
symbol for
freeway
you.
up with false work. And then they stood on the freeway and said, well, we did it. Freeways reopened. Huge success. A victory for the brilliance of our planning and our efforts. And now a long stretch of freeway that had concrete pillars has wooden false work holding it up.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, California. We dominate.
We dominate. You mentioned Mayor Bass. Let's talk for a minute about her defeated opponent, Rick Caruso. What happened to this guy? He's tweeting that he's all in for Joe Biden. I mean, has he just been broken? Has his spirit been broken?
I don't live in Los Angeles. I couldn't vote in that race. But I thought, when I saw the outcome there, I live right outside you could throw a rock from the edge of Los Angeles and land in my city, but I can't vote for the mayor there.
Yeah.
I thought two things. First of all, replacing the guy who was there, replacing Eric Garcetti, you can't get worse. But I thought when we had a choice between a career politician who's a babbler and doesn't say anything that ever means anything, and someone who's actually built stuff, someone who is literally a builder in a city that needs building, in a city that's crumbling.
Against massive criticism. No, you can't do that. The Grove will never work. It worked. I'm going to do it again. No, you can't do that. He did it again, and it's great until it gets robbed by packs of roving youth.
Yes.
Story for another day.
And I said, when LA didn't choose the builder, I said, like, we had a chance here to choose a new course. And now Rick Caruso is talking about how brilliant Joe Biden is. I can't care.
I won't care. I can't care. So what do we do? What's the game plan for California? Is there one?
California, I think the first thing I have to say about California is that it's not one place.
True.
You are Californian, you know this. When you drive up the 395 through the Eastern Sierra, that's not the Silicon Valley or Hollywood at all. There's an enormous,
That's the state of Jefferson, sir.
That is the state of
Yes,
Jefferson.
please.
If they pull that off, I'm moving there.
Yeah, would you?
California geographically is red. It's a red state. Only the 50-mile swath along the coastline is blue. But that's where 80% or 90% of the population is. Like if you go to Alturas, California, which is surrounded by cattle ranchers and the population walking the street is cattle ranchers, that's Oklahoma. You're in like the Oklahoma Panhandle in Modoc County, California. They're deeply, deeply, deeply conservative, economically conservative, socially and culturally conservative.
And probably
They're vote
descendants of
conservative.
Okies themselves.
There are, all over the state, there are 9,000 people in that conservative county. That's not a block in San Francisco or Los Angeles. So we have this enormous red state.
And yet, 3 million Trump voters last time around.
And wasn't it 4 the first time? Wasn't it 4 in 2016?
Might have been, yeah. Better than 9,000, but still not enough.
But then he had to run against the most popular politician in the history of the United States.
Yes.
Because of his brilliant, soaring oratory.
Correct.
I think what happens to California now, there was an Oakland City Council meeting where they took up the most pressing issue facing Oakland, which is Israel waging war in Gaza.
Yes.
And they had
Naturally.
like 6 hours of public comment. San Francisco too, they had so much public comment, they had like 4,000 people lined up around the block.
A very robust debate, I'm sure.
A very robust debate with both sides were really heard
Gotta
out.
hear both sides.
Every single person who spoke was insane. They weren't kind of making bad arguments, they were crazy. The Jews sent their false flag operation into Israel, their own country, to murder those people and make it look like Hamas did it.
Blue Anon, I think they call them.
It's the deepest blue anon if you look at San Francisco, if you look at Oakland. If you look at people talking, they're not wrong anymore. They're way out past wrong.
They've gone to a place beyond right now.
They've gone to a place we're going, we don't need roads, literally, and we're not going to build them. When you look at people in San Francisco not fixing San Francisco, not responding to the crisis in San Francisco, but lining up by the thousands to run against the Zionist war machine and to demand that the San Francisco Board of Supervisors intervene in Gaza. My city council intervened against Vladimir Putin in my 3.4 square mile suburban town, with a population of 26,000 people. We sent Vladimir Putin a cease and desist letter from Mayor Diana Mahmoud telling them that, the city of South Pasadena will no longer allow you to wage war on Ukraine.
Are you a nuclear-free zone as well?
Don't say that out loud. We are not, but let's not let them even think about it. When you look at the way people in California debate the issues and what they think counts as the issues, I keep waiting for the moment when we wake up and have the turn. I just don't think it's coming because there's no language for it. There's no discussion for it. We just keep going.
How about a breakup of the state of California? It wasn't Don Draper, it was Tim Draper with the 5 Californias ballot initiative. We keep hearing these sort of, the state of Jefferson, not real yet, but they want to sort of take Southern Oregon and Northern California and carve a new state out of it. Do you see anything to hope or fear?
We have to compete with Greater Idaho.
Idaho.
Yes, which really wants. We might go to war over the state of Jefferson, over those 9,000 cattle ranchers. I cannot imagine that happening. I can't imagine why anyone on the coast cares about whether or not they control Modoc County, but they will not let that go. And so, California is the most beautiful place. Maybe Washington competes.
So cold, though.
Because they have Mount Rainier and they have the
wet.
Olympic Peninsula. It's so cold, it's so wet. California is staggering. And we're destroying the one place that you shouldn't possibly be able to destroy. And we're proud of it.
It's fascinating that the utopians are actually destroying utopia.
And the secret is, the more you go, I think Andrew Clavin said this because he lives in Santa Barbara, that the deeper you go into places where people are really, really comfortable. I was in South Dakota, and I thought, what a spectacularly miserable place this is.
Not a lot of comfort out there.
There is not a lot of comfort. I was watching, it was snowing, and they had a booze cruise bike where you pedal and they serve you beer, and people were riding around in the snow drinking beer.
Yeah.
Where life is hard and people are tough, you have sensible, decent culture. And the deeper you get into comfort, like Santa Barbara, the crazier people get. Berkeley and San Francisco, Oakland, stunningly beautiful places, naturally beautiful places, shockingly high levels of unearned comfort. If you can fall out your door, you can see beautiful things. And the lack of a need to build anything, to have beauty, the lack of a need, the inheriting of spectacular, beautiful, successful places seems to hollow them out, seems to hollow out the people who live there.
And now we have this reverse dynamic where you talked about your family, lots of middle Americans in the 70s and the 80s, even the 90s, come to California, hardworking people, they have a work ethic. I think they thought of California, this paradise, as being a kind of a beauty, a climate that they actually had to live up to in some way. And what happened, you said it yourself, cheap colleges, you can send your kids there, they can be well educated the way that you are. But that's not what happened. They send their kids off to college, to the best college they can get into, and the kid comes home and they're like an unrecognizable human being. And not only that, but now they can't really get a decent job. And they looked at the dad, and I hate you, dad, and I'm gonna live. And then fast forward to, their middle age, and they're working a worse job than their father. That whole shift of population of kids who got sent out of state in California, and sometimes even in state, because those campuses are like an alien planet. And then they come home to roost, or they stay in one of the 5 major metropolitan areas. I don't know if California ever recovered from that.
I've said this is a detour, but as you talk about sending children off to college, I have a teenager. And so we're having conversations now with the college consultant and the college counselors, and we have college day at the high school, and we go and we talk to the college representatives.
When a therapist is not prestigious enough, you go up to college counselor.
And seeing people talk about, seeing upper middle class suburban parents, and seeing people from the the industry of academia talk about, like, oh, Harvard, such rigor, such prestige. Stanford, my God, imagine going to Stanford, the extraordinary education you would get. And knowing what's happening on campus, I have a PhD, I've been there, I've seen it. See, there are people who do, roaming interviews where they just take a video camera and walk around Columbia or Harvard and ask people questions like, who did we fight in the Revolutionary War? What's 8 times 10? And what century did World War II happen in?
The answer to all those questions is racism.
Yes, correct. Yeah. I stopped teaching when I had a long discussion with a student who I'd given them several different options to argue about a particular event in history, like why did this happen? And he said, well, it's because of racism. And I said, well, what if this had happened instead? And he said, well, that would be because of racism. And I said, but they also could have taken this course. Why didn't they take this course? And he said, well, it's because of racism. It's the multiple choice test where every bubble is the same bubble.
You just draw a line through all the B's.
And the last semester I taught, the first time I asked students to take out the reading, which was like 300 pages of it, because we met once a week, they took out their phones. Yeah, I didn't need to do that anymore.
Yeah.
So looking at that amazing system of colleges that Pat Brown built a lot of them.
Yeah.
That used to be, my mother talks all the time about how extraordinarily good her Cal State Fullerton education was. Cal State Fullerton is not an elite college.
Right.
About how good her professors were and how rigorous her education was. The fact that we destroyed that and we no longer have it as an engine to use to build and to create and to make the state better is, I think, a giant tragedy that somehow we're not recognizing.
There's really just this crossfire that those younger generations, I mean, this goes back decades now at this point, but on the one hand, you've got this kind of, the most beautiful place in the world. Everything sort of handy. No tornadoes. Yeah, you got earthquakes, but you get used to them. You can sleep through them. Yeah, fires, but that's sort of localized to these sort of weird areas. No hurricanes. This is just endless amounts of food. Some of the most water-intensive crops, like almonds. You just turn them into milk. It's the land of almond milk and honey. But then at the same time, you learn that you're living in a fundamentally unjust, evil, and criminal regime. No matter what. No matter how much progress we make, no matter how many good people, no matter how much restitution, reparations, taxes, whatever it is, it's never enough. There's nothing you can do about it. Why should you even try? All that you can do is send ever more money, ever more power and authority, send it off to Washington, because only this sort of super powerful thing that we build out there is going to be strong enough to finally erase racism, smash racism once and for all. So not only do you have sort of every kind of like this kind of ecological conditioning to kind of be passive, then you're getting this indoctrination that also tells you, like, guess what? There's really no point in trying to do anything except just saying the right words and trying to get the right people in some far off place to do the right thing.
What is the name for the thing we all do together?
I should know this.
Barney Frank used to say this, that government is just the name we use.
Of course.
For the thing we do together.
Yes.
It's the thing we do together.
The only thing.
Everyone who's interested in what's happened in California should do this, one simple trick. It's like a BuzzFeed headline. Go find a historical chart or a historical list of California state budgets for the last 20 years. 20 years ago, when California worked, it was well maintained and was a functioning state, relatively. The state budget was about $100 billion a year. The state budget is currently $300 billion a year. You can look that up.
And it's 3 times better than it was then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, come
yes, the death on the streets is 3 times higher. Somehow, the thing we've done with Washington, Washington will fix it. We're also doing with Sacramento. That they keep coming up with more and more things like free healthcare for illegal immigrants. Endless series of, I have a new thing we can do. I have a new idea about what extra things we can do. But all the other stuff, like the number of firefighters, the number of highway patrol officers, the number of paving projects going on in the state, remain flat while somehow we spend 3 times as much money. I think we have as many California highway patrol officers in a state of 39 million people.
Well, yeah, the pensions for those guys are great.
As we had in the
state
of 25
young
million
as
people.
a first responder in California and actually afford a house.
You do know about Chief's disease. The CHP, the California Highway Patrol, has 10 divisions that are overseen by division chiefs. And famously, for a long period of time before the legislature fixed the loophole, if you were hurt on duty and you retired because you took medical retirement from a first responder job, a portion of your pension payments was tax-free. So for a long period of time in California, the 10 division chiefs who sat in offices running the CHP divisions fell out of their chairs their last week on the job and sustained horrible injuries, or tripped on extension cords, or banged into the vending machine. Just right at the end there, so that their retirement became a medical retirement.
Yeah, makes sense. Let's talk about Silicon Valley. We haven't gotten there yet. How do you feel about Silicon Valley? You maybe not so good?
So speaking of things that used to feel creative, that used to feel like life, and that were creative in the cliche about people making extraordinary new things out in the garage.
Yeah. Mad geniuses, full of creative energy. Visionaries. As it's grown and become more and more wealthy and more powerful, and it's clearly very powerful, it becomes less and less effective and less creative. And I feel like you can see that you can physically feel in California the creativity declining. You can physically feel in California the sort of the air changing as we have fewer and fewer people who are really creative and really make things. And the fascinating spectacle of watching people in California and people in Silicon Valley and the leaders of San Francisco become absolutely baffled by Elon Musk and send code enforcement officers to harass him because he's so evil. They got a report in San Francisco where there are tens of thousands of people sleeping in their own shit and drugs on the street. They got a report that Elon Musk was sleeping in his office and he put a mattress on the floor. And they sent code enforcement officers because that building is zoned for business. It's not zoned residential. That spirit of harassment and small-mindedness and being horrified by someone who's actually creative and actually doesn't care about the money and just wants to make things and make them work. Watching people go, what is he doing? If only he had dragged his mattress out onto the street. But he left the state altogether.
And then he would have needed to crap on it. Yes.
Yes.
And fentanyl, presumably. But I don't know how that was resolved. I don't know if they still let Elon sleep in the building.
I don't know. I mean, that's ancient history now. He's California-ing Texas is Texas. California's setting up franchises.
Stanford, what happened at Stanford during COVID is, I think, a perfect metaphor for what is happening in Silicon Valley. Stanford had a group of extraordinarily gifted, capable professors who study epidemics and study medical statistics and have decades of experience. And they immediately started saying early in the pandemic, hey, I don't think this is as bad as you think it is. I think the IFR is a lot lower than we're saying it is. The World Health Organization was saying 4% of people who get COVID will die. And there were professors at Stanford saying, actually, we don't think that's true. here's the numbers we're looking at. Here's how we're coming to this. We don't think it's anywhere near that dangerous. And Stanford's response was to punish them and interfere with their research and try to prevent them from continuing to write and publish. In the heart of Silicon Valley, this engine of creativity and innovation and thought and disciplined thinking. Some people who actually, by the way, they were right about every single thing they said.
Yeah.
In the opening moments of a crisis, threw their expertise into the crisis, and their major research university in the Silicon Valley, the heart of enterprise and the heart of creativity and the heart of intellectual discipline, said, "Oh my God, stop."
They were dominated.
Yes, we dominated.
I mean, it's even gotten to the point where you got VCs, guys like Gary Tan, some of these other guys like Mike Solana. When the tech bros are the ones who are like actually having to turn to politics now and say like, perhaps it has fallen to us to get the feces off the street. That's really bad.
Somebody has to do it.
You think it's going to turn around? You think Silicon Valley is going to find some public spiritedness, maybe? No?
No, and I think the more they do that, the more they say, let's clean this up, the more they'll be hated in San Francisco.
Maybe they'll just create like a poop finder app.
That's impossible.
They'd have to create an app to find areas where there are not brown deposits on
You saw what Gavin Newsom said about that poop map.
No.
He did a local TV interview because Ron DeSantis pulled out the poop map during the debate and held it up. And Gavin Newsom did a local TV interview where he said, "Oh, I was so embarrassed for Ron DeSantis. What a disgusting moment. I was really embarrassed for him."
He learned from his recall.
What did he learn?
He learned to just tweet through it. Just say the opposite of what's happening and wait for the fantasy.
And it's just fine. It works.
It did. It worked great.
I was absolutely stunned by the outcome of that recall.
You think he's going to run for president?
I think he is already running for president. And that's why he was in China. Let me do for America what I did for California.
That moment where the streets were miraculously clean.
Yes.
No fires, no homeless, nothing.
Two things that if you want to know about California, everyone watching should look up. One, you should look up the state budget for the last 20 years. But two is you should find the press conference that Gavin Newsom had when he was the mayor of San Francisco, and he said, "We're not going to tolerate homelessness anymore. I have a 10-year plan to end homelessness in San Francisco, and we're going to do it." And he held that press conference and announced his 10-year plan to eliminate homelessness in San Francisco in 2008.
We're coming up on 10. Just a few more years to go.
Coming up on 20, right? 2008 to 2018. And it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And we just keep holding more and more press conferences saying, we're going to take this very seriously. We have a plan.
Perfect presidential
candidate. Mentioned Karen Bass, and I didn't say the words linking arms. Mm-hmm. If you follow anything she says on Twitter, anything she says in a speech, her answer to every single thing is, we need to link arms. If you link arms enough, everything's fixed.
With this one weird trick.
When the freeway burned, we linked arms.
Yeah.
She said, this is not the time for blame, for examining failures and looking for people who didn't do their job. This is not the time for that. It's time to link arms.
Government is the arms we link together.
So is California going to be fixed now? No, it's not. Not in the near term.
Is America going to be safe from Californication?
No, it is not. The last time I went camping in the Angeles National Forest, we fled our tent at 3 o'clock in the morning because another couple elsewhere in the campground played Californication, the whole album, over and over and over again next to their campfire, starting around 10 o'clock at night and continuing through 3 o'clock in the morning. They just had it on repeat. So when you say Californication, I have trauma flashbacks.
No one should have to listen to Porcelain that many times.
To failed camping trips, yes.
Okay. But seriously, though.
I don't know. I can't imagine that the rest of the country looks at California and looks at Gavin Newsom and looks at the absurdity of that debate. Gavin Newsom shouting, we dominate, and going home to the legislative analyst's office saying we have a $68 billion deficit. Because of capital flight, because of population losses, we've lost 800,000 people in 3 years. I can't imagine the rest of the country looking at that and saying that's the successful model.
Especially if they let the state and the franchise tax board is still tracking them down to claw that revenue back.
To keep, did they implement that? I haven't looked because I'm still dreaming about fleeing. Aggressive. That if you leave, you have to keep paying taxes to California for 10 years. Yes, well done. We're talking about another increase in the state income tax rate. Yeah. So eventually there will be nothing left.
And then it will return to nature.
If Chris Bray shows up in your state, if you live in a red state and this right here shows up in your state, please don't tell me to go back to California. I did not vote. The thing people say is, well, you voted for it, go back to it. I did not vote for it.
You will be a refugee. You will be a migrant.
Please give me an exemption.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, they're starting to get some data on, you mentioned Idaho, Californians coming to Idaho, and it's actually making the state redder. I think it's like 65% sort of are voters to the state's pre-existing 50 odd.
If you can make Ammon Bundy's state redder, that's an achievement.
Deep ruby ridge color, yes. Okay, well, it sounds like you have a little twinkle of optimism here that maybe the Californians who are leaving California are the right ones and they're going to make other states better.
Some of them are. I think we're seeing that the ones who are moving to Austin probably are not.
Yeah. They're keeping Austin weird.
But there's a large conservative and libertarian. California, probably more than conservatism, has a deep libertarianism.
Yeah.
California has a lot of left-wing politics, non-left-wing politics, that go back a long way. And as Californians show up in your state, just look for the Subaru Foresters, and all the rest of them are probably okay.
Final question. Words of advice, words of wise counsel to people outside the state. How do you stop your state from becoming the next California?
The focus on words and symbols and word performance. When your politicians in South Dakota or Texas or Idaho start saying, our unhoused neighbors, California is showing up in your state. The focus on symbols and performative behavior over the basics, over the, are the roads paved? Have we fixed physical reality? Look for that. And when I wish I could think of other examples offhand. You're from California. You can probably think of some other examples of our unhoused neighbors. Any kind of language about putting justice behind anything?
Restorative justice.
Climate justice. We bought the Teslas for climate justice. When you start seeing performance, and you can't pierce it.
Yeah.
You can't get to, but what about the street?
Yeah. No, we're doing postmodern post-structuralism. This is the new politics.
Look for that and strangle it in its crib.
Yeah.
It's ruin.
I think there's something to that. I don't think it's a bad piece of wisdom at all. I mean, there's a way in which California kind of perfected the art of spiritualizing the over-intellectual. And that leads to, those who would perfect the city in speech becoming prime suspects for those ruining the city in real life. Chris Bray, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Godspeed. Chin up.
I'm going back.
We're counting on you, baby. That's literally all the time we've got over here. If you want to keep up with what we're doing at Blaze Media, go to theblaze.com/return to get the latest on tech. Give us a like or comment on YouTube. Until then, I am James Polis. This is Zero Hour, and may God have mercy on us all.